The evening sky was fading into a dull, gray as the last traces of sunlight. Disappeared behind the crowded rooftops of the small town. A narrow alleyway, cracked walls, rusted doors, and a dim flickering streetlight stood as silent, witnesses to the daily struggles of the forgotten poor. In one of those cramped rooms lived a widowed mother named Amina and her two young children, Zara, only 8 years old, and Hamid, barely 5. Their father, a gentle mason who had worked tirelessly to provide for them, had passed away the previous winter due to illness they didn't have the money to treat. Since his death, Amina had been working wherever possible, washing clothes for neighbors, sweeping shops, and even standing in line hoping factories would need one more pair of hands, but life had grown harsher, crueler, and relentlessly unforgiving. The sound of the children's empty stomachs, growling, had become a part of the silence inside their home. Tonight they had no food, not even a piece of dry bread. Zara and Hamid sat on the floor, their eyes heavy but hopeful, waiting for their mother to open a pot or unveil something, anything. But Amina knew there was nothing. She walked slowly to them, her voice trembling as she stroked their hair, and said the words that no mother should ever have to say. "We'll eat tomorrow." Zara lowered her eyes, trying to be strong, swallowing hard, because she knew her mother was hurting even more than she was. Hamid simply nodded, too young to understand hunger, but old enough to understand sadness. Amina hugged them both and held them close as though love alone could feed them. Outside, the night grew cold, and the wind rattled the windows like a warning of darker days to come. Across the town, a man named Rehan was closing his small tea stall. He was known by many for his calm nature, his quiet eyes, and his unshakable kindness. He had grown up poor himself, and even now, though he worked hard and made just enough to survive, he never turned away anyone who came to him hungry. He knew the taste of hunger far too well. That night, as Rehan put away his dishes, he noticed 2 children walking slowly past his shop. He recognized them immediately, Amina's children. Their clothes were worn and dusty, their steps slow and heavy, like they were carrying invisible weights. Something tugged sharply at his heart. He approached them softly and asked, "Where is your mother?" Zara looked up, her lips quivering, before she quietly said, "At home." Rehan nodded and didn't ask more. The pain was already written in their eyes. He ushered them to sit, and without a word, he prepared warm milk and pieces of soft bread, setting them gently before the children. The aroma alone was enough to bring tears to Zara's eyes, but she shook her head and said, "Mama said we should eat tomorrow." Those words hit Rehan like a hammer to the chest. Eat tomorrow. It was not just hunger, it was despair. He knelt down and said softly, with a voice that trembled with emotion, "No, little one, you will eat today, and your mother will too." He closed his stall early, packed fresh food into a small basket, and led the children home through the dim alleyway. When they reached the house, Amina stood at the doorway, startled and embarrassed. She tried to hide her face, wiping away the tears quickly. "I didn't ask for charity," she whispered, her voice small and shaking. Rehan looked at her, eyes steady, filled not with pity but respect. "You didn't have to," he answered gently. "Some things are not charity. Some things are what God gives us through people." Amina's knees weakened, the weight of her pride and suffering collapsing all at once. Rehan placed the basket on the floor, the warm scent of rice and curry filling the empty space like hope, filling a hollow heart. The children sat waiting, watching their mother's decision, and Amina, finally breaking, nodded to them, her voice cracking as she said, "Eat." They ate like they hadn't eaten in days because they hadn't. Rehan did not speak much. He simply sat near the doorway, letting them have this moment. And when Amina finally lifted her eyes to him, tears streaming, she whispered, "Thank you." Rehan only smiled softly and said, "No mother should ever have to say we'll eat tomorrow, not while I'm alive." And in that moment, a seed of something deeper than kindness and stronger than fate began to take root, something that neither hunger nor hardship could extinguish. Days passed, then weeks, and Rehan found himself stopping by more often, not out of pity, but out of connection. The children had grown fond of him, especially Hamid, who followed him around as though Rayhan were the sun, and he was trying to stay in its warmth. Zara, quiet and thoughtful, would sit with Rayhan and read or help with chores at his tea stall. Amina watched all of this quietly. She respected him deeply but carried heavy guilt inside her heart. She didn't want to depend on someone. She wanted to stand again, to be strong for her children. So one early morning, before the sun had risen, Amina woke and washed her face, tying her hair neatly. She went to Rayhan's tea stall and said, "Please let me work with you. Not because I owe you, but because I need to earn. I do not want my children to remember hunger." Again, Rayhan looked at her with a calm sincerity and nodded. "Then we will work together," he said. And so they did. Every day, side by side, they cleaned, cooked, served, and smiled to customers who slowly began to notice something different about the humble stall. It felt warm, alive, welcoming. Business improved, not because of marketing or luck, but because kindness is a currency more valuable than money, and people feel it even before they understand it. But life is never so simple. Some people in the town began to whisper. They questioned why a young widow and a kind man worked so closely. They cast shadows where there was only honor. Amina heard their words like knives, cutting into her dignity. One evening, after a long day of work, she stood before Rayhan and said, "I cannot let my name or yours be dragged through the mud. Maybe I should leave." The pain in her voice was the pain of someone who had lost once and feared losing again. Rayhan looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said softly, "If the world will talk, let it talk about good. Let them say we lifted each other up when life tried to break us." His words were steady, unshakable, but the world's cruelty had been sharp for too long. Amina hesitated, unsure, fragile. And then one evening something happened that changed everything. A wealthy man who visited the tea stall often had noticed Amina's hard work and dedication. He offered her a job at his textile factory with fair wages and stable hours. Amina accepted, tears in her eyes. She had stood again. She had pulled herself out of the darkness. On her first payday, she bought groceries, not just for her home, but for Rayhan's stall, too. She placed the bags before him and said with a smile that carried the warmth of survival, "Now today, we eat together." Rayhan's eyes softened. Happiness was not a loud celebration. It was this, quiet, full, deep. The children ran around them, laughing, their voices light and free, sound replacing hunger, joy replacing fear. And one evening, as they all sat together, Amina whispered the words that once broke her heart, but now carried a different meaning. "We will never have to say, 'We'll eat tomorrow' again." Rayhan smiled gently, placing food before them once more, his voice low and full of tenderness. "No, we eat today." The story of their struggles spread through the town, not as whispers of scandal, but as inspiration. People who had once been silent began helping their neighbors. Food was shared, hands were extended, hearts were softened. And Amina, who once believed she was alone, learned that sometimes God sends help not in miracles of lightning or thunder, but in the quiet presence of a kind heart who shows up at the right time. And Rayhan knew that sometimes love doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins when you cannot bear to see someone hungry,